Well, welcome to the Randomizer. Today is February 10th, 2022, and tonight the Randomizer is all about biophysics. Um, for anybody who isn't a member of Schultz Laboratories or Universe Science Center, we encourage you to go to the site, click on the links, become a member, join our classes that happen every Monday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and help support our growth. More exhibits, more interactive hardware systems, more interesting things to see. Get your Oculus, walk around, explore, and study. And if you homeschool, get your kids in here, give us some hints about things you might want to see as lessons on the site so that they will enjoy it. It's very much like a video game, but you learn things, there's challenges and fun stuff to do, and it's growing every day. That being said, let's move along. So, I'm your host, I'm Charles Schultz, and we're going to talk tonight about the subject of biophysics. Now, biophysics isn't a single discipline, it's actually what's often referred to as a multidisciplinary field. And that's because biophysics covers a lot of ground. It's anything to do with life and how it works. So, when you talk about biophysics, there is an element of chemistry right off the bat. We look at the molecules of life, enzymes, proteins, the neurotransmitters, any of those things and how they interact. That will be a part of biophysics. When we look at the cellular level, we look at the cells, how they operate, the different types of cells, different portions of the animal kingdom they exist in. For instance, plants have chloroplasts that they grow, animals do not. Fungi are not plants, they're a different kingdom altogether. That's part of biophysics when you look at how those cells differ in their function and content. The organelles, the structures in the cells that do different things. So cells are like factories with a computer control system. They can 3D print new cells by growing and dividing. They have elements within them that read the instructions in the genes and transcribe them into proteins or enzymes or other molecules, or act as subroutines in the software, so to speak. There are elements that act as the power system, the mitochondria. They produce ATP from ADP and make it available for the cells as fuel, as an energy supply. The ribosomes, as I mentioned, those are like the 3D printers of the cells that read the code and make the proteins, enzymes, and other things, such as histone molecules. So there are different elements in the cell, and they act as machinery. And then when you go from cells to tissues, different types of tissues perform different functions. So you wouldn't want liver tissue where your skin tissue is, and you wouldn't want hair follicles where your cardiac muscle needs to be. So each type of tissue has a different destiny and function, and those differences are controlled by the chemistry not just of single cells, but of populations of cells. That too is part of biophysics. And so now you talk about tissues, organs, whole organisms. Organisms themselves have characteristics that require a lot of understanding of physics to see how the systems they're in operate. And I'll give you an example. You can imagine, let's say, the interplay between predator and prey. So we have a population of wolves and we have a population of rabbits. And they're within some constrained area, such as a large valley between a couple of mountain ranges. All right, so in this area, there will be a time when the rabbit population grows to be extremely large. At this point, the wolves have a lot of food and living is easy, and they eat a lot of rabbits, and the wolf population grows and grows to the point where the wolves eat almost all the rabbits. What happens? You're in a transition stage. The population of wolves begins starving, and the battle for survival gets tougher. And then winter hits, and pretty soon, most of the wolves have died back. The rabbit population now begins to rebound, and it takes time. During this time, the wolf population is at a very low level. Now, almost never do all of the wolves die or all of the rabbits die, and the fact is there are other things for wolves to eat. But the point that's being made here is there is a rising and falling cycle of population for the rabbits, and right behind them is a rising and falling cycle of population for the wolves. So the two are following each other in a cycle constantly, and each affects the other. So this study of population growth and death is actually a study of biophysics as well. So many things happen. The structures that change to make an organism a different species. This occurs over time and slowly. Well, now we can see speciation is part of the study of biophysics. So when you talk about biophysics, again, you're talking about many different things, many different fields. Many disciplines are necessary to understand the interplay and how it all works. So that's kind of fascinating. So let's take an example. I've given you the predator-prey example, but let's take another example. You get a cut, so you're injured. Now, our bodies, just about any living organism, has the capacity to heal wounds or injuries. And up to a certain point, as long as the body can support the mechanisms that do the healing, you'll recover from a lot of different injuries pretty well. In most cases, you'll say you get 100% recovery. I'm back and I'm functioning. But if you have a cut, you'll notice there's sometimes this scar tissue left. It's not a 100% recovery in terms of your form, but your function is good. So let's take a moment and examine what happens when you get a cut, because there's a fascinating series of systems that play together to make the healing process work. The first is the body sends in material in the bloodstream to patch the flow of blood, to clot it, and clotting factors get in there and promote the clotting of the blood so that the bleeding stops. It's like an artificial bandage. Well, it's nature's bandage in reality. So the blood stops flowing. Then molecules come in that will fight infection. Next, the tissue has to start growing in order to replace and repair the damage. So how does this work? The cells grow and they grow until they meet each other and then they stop. How does the cell know to stop growing? That's a pretty fascinating story. You see, there are methods for cells to communicate with each other, and one of them is caused by the protein coating on the exterior of the cell. So there are thousands or millions of tiny projections sticking off of the cell, and in many cases they look like little fingers, and they're called pili. Well, each of these is a protein structure, and what happens is these proteins will interact with the cell membrane and send a message to the cell itself. So when the cells begin to divide, they grow and they grow, and the ones at the forefront grow some more. And when they encounter cells at the other side of the wound, and the fibrous tissue starts filling in to knit it all together, it recognizes the protein pili, the signatures, on the opposite side of the rift, and it knows that it is time to stop growing. So the cell gets a message from the neighboring cells, and when there's a void, it'll grow until it reaches its destination, and it's usually similar tissue. That's pretty fascinating. So cells can communicate using literally tactile or touching based on the structure of the protein molecules on the surface of the cell. Similar mechanisms are what cause your body to recognize things that are not part of self. So the immune system is one of the things that is studied in the field of biophysics. Your immune system has the ability to recognize self and non-self. Well, how does it do that? What's interesting about the immune system is it has a type of memory all its own. It's not the sort of memory you have in your head where your neurons are working to form memories, but it's a different type of memory. It's a chemical memory. So antibodies exist in your bloodstream. Well, where do they come from? How does it happen? On encountering a foreign protein, the body has a system that makes a template that matches that protein in the opposite sense from the lock and the key. So a key has a pattern that exactly matches the lock that it opens. The antibodies in your system are like keys that fit over the structure of the invading organism, or a toxin in some cases. Protein toxins are pretty easy to recognize and defeat with your immune system. So somehow your body has a system, not the circulatory system that the blood travels through, but the lymph system, the lymphatic system. And it has a series of nodes throughout your body. And sometimes if you've had an infection or swollen, you'll feel a node that's hot and it actually feels like a nodule. Well, that's where the same word comes from. This system puts out white cells and parts of the immune system that can recognize these invaders create templates and then trigger the body to produce antibodies. Now, there's two systems here. Antibodies are like molecules of protein that latch onto the surface of an invader and make it a target. They mark, blast here. It's just like going out on a construction site and putting markers for where to dig or where to blast. Well, these proteins tag the invaders. Your body then sends out white cells and something called phagocytes. And these cells will attach to those molecules because that's their instruction. So the antibody is an intermediary. It locks onto the protein of the invader or the structure of the invader, sends out a message. The white cells stick to it and devour what it encounters. Now, what's an autoimmune problem? Well, arthritis, one of the diseases of the joint. This is an area where your proteins are damaged in some manner that the body wants to get rid of the damage, and it attacks the joint. An autoimmune disorder, auto meaning self in this case, not automated like a machine, but it's a thing where the body's immune system mistakenly creates templates to attack its own tissue. So this is something that can happen with age, and it happens because as we age, our cells can be one of three types of cell. You have juvenescent cells, which can reproduce. They can split and make more copies of themselves, but for a limited number of copies. Then you have senescent cells. Senescent cells have reached the end of their dividing history. They can no longer do it, but they're alive and they're holding place, and they fill in the spot and keep you going. And then you have cancer cells. Now, this is an odd thing that a lot of people don't know. Throughout the course of your life, you will often have a small tumor or a form of cancer, but your body has defensive systems to locate that damage and eradicate it. So you may have had cancer 6 to 12 times throughout your life, but it will have healed in most circumstances. It's only when it is persistent and your body doesn't know how to deal with it that it becomes an issue. So our bodies have the ability to heal all these complicated systems within them, normally under almost any circumstance. Of course, there are times when things don't work out, which also raises another interesting point. The response of the body to an organism is often enough simply to attack it and eat it. But there's another response, a second response that the body can make, and you're very familiar with this one. Sometimes the body will trigger its temperature control system, its thermostat, to go up a few degrees, and you end up with a fever. Why? Well, this is an evolved response because many organisms are very sensitive to the temperature of the environment they live in. And if your temperature goes up a little too high, it wrecks the ability of that organism to reproduce successfully. And so the fever is literally your body's heating up and autoclaving the invading organisms. And then when they are defeated, your temperature comes back down again. That's the way the system is supposed to work. Of course, we know that can sometimes go wrong. So there's some very interesting things that go on in the tissues and cells of your body. Here's another interesting one. You hear a lot of people talk about free energy. Well, it isn't free. Everything has a cost. But there is a special form of free energy that's available in the living cells, and it's called the Gibbs free energy potential. It isn't actually free energy, but it is the cell's temperature and chemical composition, the pH level, the existence of certain compounds that makes the environment within the protoplasm of the cell capable of supporting its reactions properly. So let's say you have a couple of devices that, if they got close enough, would stick together like magnets. And in this case, it'll be a protein and a reactant of some sort. Well, how does that happen? Don't they just lay there? Actually, no. Within the cell, the cytoplasm, the fluid that is within it, is moving and circulating all the time. And so materials are being carried by reaction sites or elements of the cell that need those materials. And when they're near, they automatically lock into place and perform their function. So the energy to move them around is the Gibbs free energy potential. And it's also the energy to cause or promote certain chemistries to occur. For instance, if your body's temperature drops below a certain level, So a number of very bad things can happen. One, in the brain's cells, the neurons, have phospholipids, and lipids are like oily compounds. These are phosphorus-containing oily compounds in the membrane of the cell and also within the cell, the neuron. And if the temperature goes too low, the phospholipids will freeze up just like wax solidifying or fat hardening up because it's too cool. And obviously, under those circumstances, a neuron cannot conduct. It can't send its signals around, and it can't respond to neurotransmitters. So you have to remain at a certain elevated temperature to keep the phospholipids in the brain from freezing. The other thing is, if your body temperature goes too high, it can actually cause proteins to denature. So what is denaturing? Everybody has seen an egg white. And the white of the egg is actually a mixture of proteins and other chemicals. When the proteins are heated, an interesting reaction occurs. Now, a protein isn't just this long, stringy molecule with radicals hanging off of it. The portions of the molecule that stick off, the radicals, can actually move. They have degrees of freedom, and sometimes they'll spin like a propeller in place, or sometimes they'll wobble back and forth. So this is just a couple of examples. If those radicals move too fast or too hard and strike another molecule, they will stick together. If they're moving fast enough and hard enough, remember, heat is velocity, it's energy of movement. And the hotter a thing is, the faster all the molecules in there are moving. So if the temperature goes too high, the molecules will stick in the wrong places and won't come apart. They've been damaged. This is denaturing. And when you heat the white of an egg, the clear material becomes white because all the loose radicals in the proteins are sticking together and cannot be broken apart again. Now, this isn't 100% true. Some molecules are actually very adept at taking protein radicals apart. And one of these is called papain. The papaya plant contains an enzyme, and I'll tell you about an enzyme in just a moment here. Enzymes that can cleave apart proteins and digest them in a sense. When you place papain on meat, it makes the meat tender. That's the tenderizer molecule that everybody uses when they're using meat tenderizer on their foods. Many people will cook meat that's very tough with papaya in the mix, and the papaya's enzymes will break it down and make the meat tender. So what's an enzyme? What's a protein? There's an easy way of looking at this. This is an amazing part of biophysics, understanding what the molecules do. Proteins are produced by many cells and used by every cell. What a protein is, it is a structural molecule used to make something. So you can think in a sense of proteins as being the bricks, the drywall, the mortar, the screws, the substance of which things are made. And different proteins have different shapes and functions. Enzymes are a special type of protein that are active. Enzymes have a tool that allows them to stick to a molecule and cleave it into two smaller molecules, or in some cases to take two small molecules and put them together into one larger molecule. So what's fascinating about this is that your genes are the instructions, like blueprints, to tell the cells what to make and how to do it. And the two primary things that your genetic code is full of is the records for the construction of proteins, the building materials, and enzymes, the hammers and saws and screwdrivers. Enzymes are the tools for putting together and taking apart molecules. Proteins are the structure from which the cell builds everything. Now, there's a lot more involved than that, but this gives you kind of a quick glossary of some of the terms of the cell, the ribosome, the mitochondria, other things, the nucleus, and the chromosomes, and then some of the things that those molecules do, the proteins and the enzymes' basic functions. So if you're interested in biophysics, you're in for a long ride, but there's an awful lot you can do with it, and biophysics is being used to transform our world every day. We now breed bacteria specifically, for instance, to consume oil spills or to break down toxins. I met with a woman who was designing bacteria to literally recover precious or rare materials out of scrap, and then they could be used completely recyclably. Imagine creating machines similar to bacteria that we could pour in a landfill and they would digest and break everything down and then return the metals, the compounds of industrial chemicals, all the materials to a state where we can reuse them. You know, we could do that with nanotechnology, and biophysics is going to be a huge part of it. Remember, biology is natural nanotech. So biophysics is a foot in the door for understanding and studying that and working with it. So at this point, if anybody has any questions or comments or ideas, the floor is open. And I'm going to encourage the people who are watching to ask questions. Think of these things in advance. We usually tell every morning what the subject's going to be. Think about what you want to know and bring it to us, and we'll take the floor and we'll listen to you and we'll answer your questions as best we can. Meanwhile, go to Schultz Laboratories or Universe Science Center, click on the links, sign up for our classes on Mondays, or become a member, and help us grow and share the word. Let people know we're here. Let them hear these amazing talks we give. I say they're amazing, okay. I hope you think they're amazing. But join us and help us, and let's make this into a resource that everybody's going to want to use. So, any questions, anything for anybody? And I don't see anything at the moment. Well, all right. At that, I appreciate everybody coming in to see this and participate. And we have a number of supporters, and it's growing, and I'm very happy to see that. I encourage you, share this with your friends, let them see it, let them join us. Go to our site, click the link for the randomizer, and join us at 6 p.m. weekdays. This is just Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for watching and for participating and supporting us, and I hope everybody has a great day. Have a wonderful life.